This is my little boy, baby Blue, and he's about 1.5 years old. And if you were to ask him what his thoughts were on climate change, he might say something like this. Well, we love you, Blue, but I think we can all say that Blue does not have a way with words, which is why I'm here today to talk on his behalf about an issue that matters so much to him, and I think an issue that matters to all of us, and that is the issue of climate change. Because over the past decade and a half, I've traveled around the country and ultimately the world studying the biggest businesses on the planet, companies like Coca-Cola, Walmart, ExxonMobil, you name it, FedEx, and so many more. And I've looked at these companies from an environmental angle, thinking about their ecological footprint and looking at their environmental pledges over the past several decades. And what's so striking when you study the environmental history of big firms is just how unsuccessful many of these corporations have been at meeting their sustainability targets. I'll give you an example. A study conducted by a consulting firm, Bain & Company, that looked at about 300 companies found that there was about a 4% success rate when it comes for these companies meeting their sustainability targets. Now, I see some of my students in the audience, and I hate to say it, but if you got 96% of the questions wrong on the midterm exam last week, you failed the exam. But of course, this isn't just an exam. We're talking about the planet here, and we're failing on a global scale. So the question is, what gives? Like, how do we do better than that, than 4%? And today, I want to point to a problem that I've seen in the historical record when it comes to businesses meeting their sustainability targets. And I'm calling this problem the efficiency distraction. The efficiency distraction is when companies become so enamored, so obsessed with finding new technologies that will allow them to more efficiently use fossil fuels in their corporate system, that they lose sight of the bigger sacrifices and radical changes they need to make as a business to actually radically reduce their greenhouse gas emissions. And like any good historian, I think it's important to go back to the past to see how this problem has played out. Because people were talking about this efficiency distraction 150 years ago. People like this dour-looking economist, William Stanley Jevons, who in 1865 wrote a monograph called The Coal Question. He was living at a time in the economy when coal was becoming increasingly important to everything, railroads, steam engines, you name it. It drove the economy, but it was a finite natural resource, and so many economists were trying to figure out, how do we preserve this fossil fuel that's becoming so important to our economy? And some argued, the best strategy here is just to create more efficient technologies that can use coal more efficiently. And it made sense in many ways, but Jevons, dour man that he was, pushed back and said, you know what, that's not true. If you look at this efficiency story, when we create efficient technologies that can use coal more efficiently, in the long run, folks, we're actually going to use more coal because we're going to make it more profitable to use that coal. We're going to make it more cost efficient to use that resource. Now today, economists call this conundrum Jevons paradox. And again, it has many components, but its essential core is that efficiency can often lead to the increased consumption of a natural resource like fossil fuels, not decrease that consumption over time. And economists are very careful to point out this Jevons paradox does not apply equally to all industries or all stories of natural resource extraction. But if we look at some of the biggest businesses today and their deep, deep dependency on fossil fuels, we can see this Jevons paradox and more broadly, this efficiency distraction playing out in our own time today. So let's look at some firms. Let's take a company like Delta Airlines, which became one of the largest airline companies in the world by the end of the 20th century. In the 1970s, it was facing a serious energy crisis. Like so many businesses, it was trying to figure out how to fuel its empire when oil prices were skyrocketing. There was an OPEC oil embargo and so many other things that they were facing. And so they turned to efficiency. Like many businesses, they invested in new aircraft that could fly further distances with more passengers with less fuel. Efficiency was the solution. And you can see this here in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. They became much more fuel efficient as a fleet. But if we look at this same exact period, and we look not at efficiency, but we look at actual consumption of fossil fuels, we see over the same period, they radically increased their consumption of jet fuel. I think of Jevon's rolling over in his grave, being like, folks, I predicted this 150 years ago, right? We talked about how efficiency can create this expansion of your business that can actually increase the consumption of that resource. This is what I mean by the efficiency distraction. And we can see it in other industries as well. Let's take the chemical industry. Back in the 1920s, petroleum firms were refining oil and turning it into the gasoline and fuels that powered our trucks, our planes, everything in the economy. But as a byproduct of refining all of that oil, there was a tremendous amount of waste that was left over that just wasn't being used. And chemical companies at the time, Dow, DuPont, Monsanto, said, we can intervene here. We can more efficiently use the waste of the oil industry and turn it into products that are useful for society. Things like plastics, or even synthetic fibers in our clothes, or petrochemical pesticides that can help us grow our food. And folks, I get it. On the face of this, that sounds like a really good thing. You're taking this environmental problem, the waste of the oil industry, and turning it into useful products. I call this period in American history the period of scavenger capitalism. Scavenger capitalism. Because almost everything that became essential to the normal functioning of the economy ultimately was derived back to these petrochemical products that were produced by chemical companies that were scavenging on the waste pile of a booming fossil fuel industry. And again, a scavenging system like this can seem kind of good. You're taking a waste and using it. But in the long term, what we see here is that in some ways this created some of the biggest environmental problems we face today. In fact, you could argue that the efficient use of the waste of the oil industry, this finite natural resource, made us even more dependent on fossil fuels today. I mean, look around you right now. Almost everything in this room comes from some kind of synthetic product. I'm looking right now and thinking about the polyester in your clothes, or the synthetic fiber in the carpet that we walk down today, or even the plastic that's encasing the seat that you're sitting in right now. This is the world that we live in. And I think trying to create a fossil fuel-free economy is not just how we're going to power our cars or power our power plants, it's how we're going to make everything else. And that's a real conundrum for us. And you could argue that we became so efficient at producing plastics that we're buried in plastic right now. And we're also buried in an overabundance of petrochemicals that are in our food supply and water system in ways that threatens our health. Now, this is not to say that efficiency is just bad on its own, but to say that when we focus on efficiency to the exclusion of these bigger issues, we can miss some serious environmental problems. This is the efficiency distraction, and we can see it in other industries. One last example. Let's look at the logistics industry, an industry I've looked at recently, and a company, FedEx, from Memphis, Tennessee, that recently in its sustainability report from 2021 mapped out this really interesting path to getting to carbon neutrality. But at the top, you'll see that one of their main goals is to reduce their carbon emissions intensity by 30%. Well, hot dog, that sounds like we're going to fix this climate problem overnight. You're radically reducing your greenhouse gas emissions. But wait. What is carbon emissions intensity? And this is so important because it's not just FedEx that's using this. This is many businesses today that are holding this out as their metrics showing you that they're becoming sustainable. And when you look at the fine print, you see a problem. It is a measure of efficiency. It is greenhouse gas emissions over the total revenue that you're generating as a company. Now, we may have some younger folks in the audience, maybe some fifth graders. They can help us out here. If the revenue increases the denominator, well, guess what? You can increase your greenhouse gas emissions. And folks, that's exactly what's happening in many of these cases. In the case of FedEx, even though they're saying we're approaching a 30% reduction in our carbon emissions intensity here, if you look at their overall greenhouse gas emissions over the past half decade, the total emissions, they've been going up. This is the distraction, right? This is what's preventing us from making the kind of real change that we need to make, and we can do better. So that's a lot, and I get it. You're sitting out in the audience right now saying, well, thanks a lot, Bart. What do I do now? And I think there is something we can do. Because as big as this issue is, and it feels like we're in a big ocean, I get it, as individuals, like how can we make a change on this issue? I'm here to tell you at the end of the talk here that you're part of a collective. You're part of a huge Ohio State family. Just showing up today shows that you're part of that family. And if you don't believe me that you're part of a collective, all I have to do here at Ohio State is say 2 letters. OH. OH. Listen to how loud you can be. I mean, listen to how raucous you can be as a family, as a community here at Ohio State. You can raise your voice and make a difference. So what can we do on this crisis of climate change? We can join the voices of thousands of students across this country who in recent months have told their institutions to stop investing in companies that practice this kind of efficiency distraction, specifically fossil fuel firms like ExxonMobil, whose sustainability reports, I assure you, are filled with discussions of carbon emissions intensity. If that gets under your skin, if that makes you feel frustrated, do something about it. We can speak up as an institution here and join the voices of hundreds of students at Ohio State who over the past half-decade have been trying to tell this institution to do the same thing, to take our $6.8 billion endowment, our investments, and put it in companies that are doing the right thing and not practicing this efficiency distraction. It's going to be a bold move, and I know that's going to take courage from all of us in this room and people watching this elsewhere. But I promise you this, I will be with you. I will be with you in that family, in that journey, as we fight together this battle. Because there's one other person in this audience today who I love very much. Whew. He's 4 years old, and he sits right alongside you guys. His heart is beating alongside yours. And he doesn't have the words like his little brother to fight on this issue. But you do. You and I do. So let's speak up. Let's do the right thing. If we do that, Ohio State, we can change this campus, we can change this country, and we can change this world. Thank you all very much.